History Month. I'm celebrating women's history by reviewing African women in politics. And I'm going to be discussing with you my paper titled Making Strides, African Women in Politics. You know, these days we see African women in politics and they're so commonplace, so normal to us. But it wasn't always so. We talk about the founders, the founding mothers, so to speak, those that championed the cause for women to be so involved in politics, like Nina Mba, like Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, like Winnie Mandela. Those women that fought for our right to sit in the legislatures. So today I'm going to be reviewing some of that history as well as our present situation, that is where we are as women in African politics. The early participants, as I will call them, were non-institutional. That is, they were not integrated into the political system, so to speak. They were those that protested injustice. They were the market women who, from time to time, would rise against an injustice they felt within the system. They were those women that galvanized and mobilized for a cause. But gradually, we saw women becoming participants in the institutional processes of politics. We saw them as party members, large numbers of them. There's nothing that legitimizes a candidate like just that mass of women following him, chanting his name and singing his praise and dancing at the rallies. For their efforts, largely they got a bag of rice, some chicken change, some token for all of their efforts. Today we have moved into a lot more substance as women in politics. We see candidates running successively, and we see that even as they run, they are not, as in the past, in just the token offices, Ministry of Women or Youth, Sports and Culture or Children and Family, but they are in substantive offices, including Office of the President. Today, Rwanda is the sole country in the world with the highest number of female legislators, ranking at 56% at some point, at 54% at another. So really, today we can study both in quality and quantity African women in politics. There are very many challenges to women's participation. Let's not kid, and some of those challenges persist. Those include money. Running for office requires a lot of funding. The ways that we have seen, though, around it is when non-profits either sponsor a candidate or women's associations such as market women groups sponsor their candidate. And that way, it's the pooling of resources that provides the funding for a candidate to run for office. And that has worked well in favor of many women legislators and many women candidates, in that the pooling of resources helps them to have a platform similar to their male counterparts. Another way that governments have made it a lot more easier for women to enter into politics is actually subsidize the cost of entry. Simply the cost of registration. If that is waived, then the playing field is a lot leveler for women. Another problem, of course, is lack of legitimacy. I remember once in northern Nigeria when a cleric had declared that no woman would ever run in his local government over his dead body. Unfortunately, as fate will have it, he actually died and a woman ran in that local government. So there are things like that happen, socio-cultural ideas, sociocultural ideology, and ways of life that seem intractable, that keep women out of political sphere. Then we also look at, even within the parties, these same cultural attitudes against women are broadening, whereby what you have is a majority of women at the membership, and they never quite move beyond that status of members. They are the ones that dance at the rallies, cook at the rallies, throw the fanfare for the male candidates, but they're never actually running for office themselves. And we've actually seen instances where women who run for office and win are asked to bow to or to pave the way for their male candidates to sit in those offices. That is, they're asked to step aside. Why would you step aside when you fought and won the seat? So such injustice persists because of sociocultural biases against women's leadership. There is wider acceptance of women candidates, both from men and, tougher still, from women. Because initially, even when you have the support of men, most women are hesitant about supporting a sister running for office. The idea being, what is she going to do? What does she want to, what's she trying to prove? What is she going to change? How is whatever she's doing going to impact our status as women? As she was tempting fate. But today we don't have that. There's also organizational and grassroots support. As I said when I was talking about financing the campaign, some nonprofits step in to do that. And those nonprofits also step in to help female candidates to improve their visibility, to campaign, to reach their grassroots audiences. And so that is changing the game for female candidates. You also have, in many countries, quotas or institutional reforms that require a certain percentage of women be in offices. So that, yes, we can say still across Africa today, the larger percentage of women in offices were appointed as opposed to being elected. But those reforms at the institutional level, at the governmental level, that change the way the game is played also help women. So that if you know that within your region you have to elect a certain percentage, let's say 5% women, you then make sure you field female candidates, and the whole slate is not just male candidates. This has resulted, of course, in numbers such as 12 out of 365 legislators or 20 out of 400 legislators. Why? Because those quotas matter and those seats are filled by women. There's also stronger female candidacy. In the past, with immediate post-independence era, not many women had the wherewithal. Not many women had the capital in and of themselves to run for office. But today you have many women owning businesses, being CEOs of their own business empires, owning land and other collateral that they can then use as capital for their campaign. It also helps them to build clout and visibility when they're business moguls. Why? Because they're already in the public eye. They have their credentials. They have earned their credentials and their rights to be seen and heard. And so moving into politics then is just a natural next step. Some are using also the coattails. They're riding the coattails of either a father who was in politics or a husband who was in politics, and that way that grants them the platform to speak. So relational power still translates into actual power when we talk about African politics. Now, we also at this point in time probably need to talk about the First Ladies Club, or and what they do in that. To some extent, they wield power, but that is informal. So my analysis is not focused on the informal, but in the actual formal power. But the fact that we have a First Ladies Club means it's now acceptable for First Ladies to demonstrate some form of political awareness and public service even as women, which means it's also more acceptable for women to be in politics. And that opens up the field. There are tangible results of women holding office. As I said, the higher the numbers we have in terms of quantity, we also have quality. When we talk about Rwanda, in 2004, when Rwandan women first got into office en masse, we had a 49% representative in parliament. And of course, the whole world was watching to see, is this just the numbers? Is this just about the numbers? But what we have seen is that it's not simply about the numbers, but the types of legislatives that they are proposing. For instance, rape as a war crime, domestic violence, equal property ownership, and such policies that equalize the gender divide, that help women even within the society. It is said that women tend to focus more on socioeconomic policies, and these policies are those that improve society at large. We also see this tendency when we talk about Madam President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in Liberia, and the types of policies that she's enacting in order to rebuild Liberia. So that you find that the focus on socioeconomic policies is really what Africa needs to move to the next level. The development of infrastructure, the rebuilding of schools, the focus on education and health care, or on social amenities. So that when that infrastructure is well laid, then we can talk about global significance. And so really it's a great time to invest in women candidates. And we have seen that from war-torn Rwanda to war-torn Liberia. We also have I've seen a couple of headliners, really highly visible women with portfolios that are enviable. And one of those headliners is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from the World Bank and then Nigeria. She negotiated a debt strategy for Nigeria. That is, she was able to help Nigeria meet its balance of payments with the IMF and the World Bank. She also introduced transparency in Nigerian affairs and finances, which erstwhile had not been so. What we find also with these female leaders, which kind of illustrates what I had mentioned earlier about women focusing on socioeconomic policies, is that what we find is the focus on transparency, the focus on reducing corruption, the focus on equity, equitable distribution of the resources, or equitable distribution of the wealth of a continent. Not just along gendered lines, but whether the very young or the very old. So that the cake is, or the pie is shared amongst all. And so that inbred, so to speak, equity, the need for justice is often manifested when women come into power. We also see Thandi Mbete, who was a deputy president in the Republic of South Africa by 2008. She worked on the Burundi peace process. Now, when in the past we looked at women in office, they usually were associates. They didn't have high profile or high portfolio offices. And they worked on softer issues of social justice or economic distribution. Now we have someone working on war, high politics, if we talk in real politic terms. Talking about war, talking about peace, renegotiating peace. And we also have that with Helen Johnson Sirleaf as Madam President. The fact that the reintegration of combatants into society, which normally we would say, well, maybe not a male-female issue, but has become so. And so we see women in the peace processes both informally and formally institutionally. In reconciling warring factions, in rebuilding Liberia and successfully running for office, President Helen Johnson Sirleaf carries the cake. She demonstrates for us what female leadership is like in Africa, what female leadership can do for Africa, particularly at this crucial time when we're still struggling with AIDS, we're still struggling with economic crisis, we're still struggling with rampant corruption. You don't have the same headlines coming out of Liberia that we had 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Not only that, you don't even have the same headlines coming out of any other country in Africa when we talk about the transparency of her government, or the kinds of infrastructure that her government is laying. Sure, Liberia has a long way to go. Sure, there is so much to be done. But she has shown herself to be up to the task and to be doing the task. So what we have then is an active rebuilding of the fabric of society, which I believe that women are good at. And so when we have women leaders, we increase the numbers of women leaders, that is, we can see that restructuring going on. We can see the reconstruction going on in society. In conclusion, when we talk of numbers, the numbers are better. That is, when we look at the quantity of female legislators, female ministers, female cabinet members, the numbers are speaking better. Even in Niger, a woman ran for office. So that we find even in those places where it was, oh, it's an anathema for women to run for office, they're doing that. In the Arab Spring, women were at the forefront, chanting, Mubarak must go, Libya must be free. So we find that women's political awareness is greater than it used to be. And also the energy is there. And this is being seen in the numbers of women elected into office. So the numbers are good. We have 49% in Rwanda in terms of parliament, 30% at that time in South Africa. On average, we have, say, about 14% across Africa, largely in sub-Saharan Africa. We don't have such high numbers yet in Maghreb Africa. The quality is great. Substantive positions as ministers of mines, deputy vice president, president, those are substantive positions. So we've moved away from the era of tokenism or the sole ministry that has limited portfolio. We've moved into substance. Now, what are we getting out of these women? Because it's one thing to say we have the numbers, it's another to say we have actual substance coming from those offices. But I'm pleased to announce we do have substance. We have results-oriented anti-corruption leadership. We have a lot more transparency coming from women leaders than we have seen with the men. There is a socioeconomic focus largely, and that is needed in Africa to build infrastructure from which Africa can then face the global community. So the focus is right. We're not padding the defense or the military spending by 30–40%. Rather, we have women that are investing in society, in the people. We also have flattened hierarchies. We have a lot more openness with the female leaders, whereby they are networking with hosts of entities, both within their states and outside, in order to bring about the results for their states. If we look at President Johnson Sirleaf and the numbers of organizations that she's working in to bring relief, to bring infrastructure, to bring technical assistance, to rebuild her country. That's a lot of energies that she's harnessing and coordinating in order to bring about the expected outcomes in Liberia. We also have a greater inclusion and participation of the masses. When we consider that 50% largely in most of these countries are women, and women had as well been marginalized, the fact that we don't have women in leadership, the natural first constituency of such a legislator is women. Those that argue that this is not so, but however, there's a compassion towards women so that you have agencies that focus on micro lending, or agencies that in one way or the other cater to the weaknesses that women have within the society, and thus help them to build to build capacity, either to start businesses or to get educated or to engage themselves in one way or the other in enterprise that would not only give them immediate remuneration but make their future a lot more promising. So it's a great day for women in African politics, and we're definitely looking forward to greater heights, a lot more quantity and a lot more substance. Thank you.